The first thing the collections agent asked me was whether I was prepared to resolve the outstanding balance on a defaulted business loan for a landscaping company in Ohio. I almost laughed, because at that point I thought it had to be a wrong number, or one of those scams where someone says your social security number has been suspended and hopes you panic before you think. My name is Olivia Delacroix, and I learned that an old army friend had used my identity to take out a business loan she never repaid. I was standing in my kitchen in Virginia, still in my work blouse, holding a mug of coffee I had reheated twice and forgotten twice, and this stranger was calmly telling me that I was listed as the personal guarantor on a loan for a business I had never heard of. When I told him he had the wrong woman, he read my full legal name back to me, then my last 4 digits, then an old address, then details from my military service that I had not put on a civilian form in years. That was the moment my hand tightened around the mug so hard I thought the handle might snap. Not a credit card opened by some anonymous thief, not a clerical mix-up. A deliberate loan guarantee with a signature that looked enough like mine to make a bank believe I had promised to cover another woman's debt. The worst part was not even the money at first. It was hearing those service details repeated back to me by a collections agent and realizing only a very small circle of people would have known them in that exact combination. One of them was my old friend from the unit, Bennette Rowland. We called her Benny back then. She and I had served together for years, deployed together, pulled each other through long nights, bad orders, homesickness, injuries, family emergencies, and the strange loneliness that can exist even when you are surrounded by people wearing the same uniform. After we both left the Army, we stayed in touch in that loose way veterans often do. A text on Veterans Day, a birthday message, a phone call when somebody from the old unit got married or passed away. Once every year or two, she would call and talk like no time had passed. I never imagined that old bond could turn into the exact doorway she used to steal from me. The collections agent's name was Mr. Haskins, and to his credit, he did not sound aggressive at first. He sounded practiced. He said the lender had assigned the account after months of non-payment and that the original borrower, Rowland Grounds and Design LLC, had stopped responding. I repeated that I had no connection to that company. He said, as if reading from a screen, that I had signed as a personal guarantor at the time the loan was issued. I said, very slowly, that I had signed no such thing. He asked whether I wanted the mailing address for submitting a dispute. That was when I stopped answering on instinct and started writing everything down. Company name. Loan number. Date of origination. Original amount. Current balance. Lender. Address. His direct extension. He sounded mildly surprised when I asked him to repeat each detail, but I had spent enough years around paperwork and enough years watching small mistakes become large problems to know that panic helps no one. The balance was just under $87,000 with fees and interest. The loan had been issued 18 months earlier. According to the account notes, I had guaranteed it based on a signed application and supporting identity documents. I asked what documents. He said he could not release the full file, but he could tell me that the application included my service history, a prior civilian employer, and a stated net worth that was not exact but close enough to make my stomach turn. I asked him to pause. I set the mug down. I looked at the wall above my sink where I had framed a small photo of my old platoon, taken before a ceremony on a cold morning when all of us were pretending not to shiver. Benny was in that photo, shoulder to shoulder with me, smiling like she owned the day. I remember thinking, no, not her. Not Benny. Then I thought, who else would know that much? I did not accuse her out loud. I did not even say her name to the collections agent. I told him the debt was fraudulent, that I disputed it in full, and that I wanted the lender's fraud department information. He gave me a number, and repeated that collection activity would continue unless the lender confirmed removal of my guarantee. That sentence followed me around the rest of the evening. Collection activity would continue. Meaning my credit could be damaged, meaning I might have to fight for months to prove I had not agreed to pay for a business I did not own, did not invest in, and did not know existed. I called the lender the next morning at exactly 8:02. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Benny's face from the old photograph, then my name on some loan document, then my credit report collapsing because someone had decided my identity was useful. The lender was a regional business finance company called Harborstone Capital. I was passed from customer service to commercial servicing to a woman in the fraud department named Dana. Dana was polite in the careful way people become polite when they have learned never to say too much. I told her I was listed as a guarantor on a loan I had never signed. I gave her the loan number. There was a long pause while she pulled up the file. Then she asked me to verify my identity. I almost said, apparently everyone else already has, but I held my tongue and answered, Dana confirmed that my name appeared on a personal guarantee attached to Rowland Grounds and Design LLC. I asked for a copy of every document bearing my name. She said they could not release the entire borrower file without review, but they could provide the guarantee application and signature pages to the address on record. The address on record was an apartment I had lived in years earlier, before I bought my townhouse. That made my skin prickle. I told her that address was outdated and that sending sensitive documents there would continue the problem. She said I needed to submit proof of current address and a fraud dispute affidavit. By noon, I had scanned my driver's license, a utility bill, and a written dispute. By 4, I had confirmation that the documents would be mailed to me securely. Then I waited. Those 5 days felt longer than some field exercises. I checked my credit report every morning. I froze my credit. I changed passwords. I pulled old file boxes from my closet and spread documents across my dining table, trying to understand what pieces of my identity could have been used. DD 214 copies, VA paperwork, old insurance forms, a few documents from the Transition Assistance Program, records I had once shared with people I trusted because in the military, paperwork gets passed around constantly. Someone needs a copy for a packet. Someone asks what form they need. Someone uses your example because you already figured out the process. Back then, none of it felt dangerous. We were young, tired, and convinced that the people beside us were family. Benny and I had been especially close in those years. She was 2 years older than me, loud in a way that could fill a room, funny when everyone else was miserable, and fiercely competent when it mattered. She could talk a supply sergeant into finding missing gear, and talk a crying private into standing up straight again. She knew when my mother had surgery because she covered for me so I could call home. I knew when her first marriage fell apart because she sat on the curb outside the barracks and told me she had no idea who she was without the army giving her a schedule. We shared copies of recommendation letters, resumes, award write-ups, and discharge paperwork when we were both transitioning out. I remembered sitting at a coffee shop near Post with a cheap scanner between us, helping each other assemble civilian job packets. Had I left something with her? Had she copied something without asking? Had I emailed her a sample document years ago? That was the part that made me feel foolish before I had even seen proof. Trust leaves a paper trail. The packet from Harborstone arrived by courier on a Wednesday afternoon. I signed for it with a hand that was steadier than I felt, then sat at my dining table and opened it slowly. The first page was a personal guarantee application. My name was typed at the top. Olivia Marie Delacroix. There was my old address. My current employer, but with my prior job title, like someone had pieced it together from memory and LinkedIn. My military service listed as a positive character factor. My income was close, though inflated. My assets were exaggerated. My signature was at the bottom. Seeing it made me feel oddly cold. It looked like mine if you glanced quickly. The slant was similar. The O in Olivia had the same open loop I use. The D in Delacroix had an exaggerated top stroke, something I had picked up years ago because my father signed his name that way. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it became. The pressure was uneven. The letters were too careful. My real signature moves fast and gets messier toward the end. This one looked like somebody had drawn it while holding their breath. I pulled out old mortgage documents, my passport renewal copy, and a signed VA form. I laid them beside the loan paper. There it was. Same shape, wrong rhythm. I took photographs, but I did not send anything yet. I called an attorney first. Her name was Priscilla Nakamura, and she had been recommended by a colleague who once had to unwind a forged lease guarantee. Priscilla's office was in Richmond, and by the time I arrived the next afternoon, I had a folder so organized it probably betrayed how frightened I was. She greeted me with a firm handshake and let me talk for almost 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked 3 questions that told me I had come to the right person. Did I ever give verbal permission for anyone to sign on my behalf? No. Did I ever have any financial interest in Rowland Grounds and Design? No. Did I know the owner? I hesitated. I told her I believed I did. I told her about Benny. Priscilla did not make a face. She just wrote the name down and said, "The relationship matters, but we prove the document first." She explained that lenders do not always move quickly when a guarantor disputes a signature after a default. From their perspective, fraudulent guarantors and regretful guarantors can sound very similar at the beginning. The difference is evidence. She wanted a forensic handwriting examiner to review the signature. She wanted a formal dispute letter that preserved my rights under credit reporting laws. She wanted me to file an identity theft report if the facts supported it, but not before we had the paperwork organized. I asked her whether she thought Benny had done it. Priscilla looked at the signature page and said, "I think someone wanted this to look like you." That was not comforting, but it was clear. The handwriting examiner was a retired document specialist named Dr. Elaine Mercer. She worked out of a small office lined with magnifiers, lights, and framed certificates. I gave her the loan signature and 15 known samples of my signature from different years. She explained that she was not there to guess who signed it. She was there to determine whether the questioned signature was written naturally by the same hand as the known samples, or whether it showed signs of simulation, tracing, or disguise. I watched her examine the pages under angled light. She pointed out things I had noticed vaguely and things I never would have seen. Pen lifts in places where my hand normally continues. Tremor in curved strokes. Hesitation marks at the beginning of letters. A strange uniformity in parts of the signature that should have varied. She asked whether any of my known signatures had been available to the borrower. That question hit me harder than expected. I said, possibly. From old military paperwork. She nodded, not because she knew, but because she had heard versions of this before. 2 days later, her written report concluded that the loan signature was not consistent with my natural writing habits, and showed features associated with tracing or careful simulation from an existing model. In plain English, someone had copied my signature. Priscilla sent the report to Harborstone with a formal demand that they suspend collection activity, remove my name from the guarantee, notify the collections agency, and correct any credit reporting connected to the account. She also told me we needed to understand how Benny, if it was Benny, had obtained enough information to complete the application. That was where Marisol Vance came in. Marisol was a private investigator who used to work financial fraud cases for a large insurer. She had gray-streaked hair, a dry sense of humor, and a habit of asking a question, letting silence sit, and then watching what people did with it. She met me at Priscilla's office and asked me to map my relationship with Benny from the Army to the present. When did we serve together? What documents did we share? What email accounts did we use? Did she ever visit my home? Did she know my family? Did she know my finances? At first, I said no to that last one. Then I remembered conversations, complaints about mortgage rates, jokes about my careful savings habits, a call after I got promoted at my civilian job, a conversation where Benny asked how I had qualified for my townhouse because she was thinking of buying a place near Columbus. None of those conversations felt sensitive at the time. Friends talk, veterans talk in a shorthand that makes old trust feel current even when years have passed. Marisol requested public records on Rowland Grounds and Design. Benny had formed the company 3 years earlier. At first, it looked legitimate. Residential landscaping, small commercial contracts, seasonal crews. There were social media posts with before and after photos, a logo on a truck, even a few local business features about a woman veteran building a company after service. I remembered liking one of those posts. Maybe I had commented, "Proud of you, Benny." My stomach twisted when Marisol showed me the business filings. Bennette Rowland, owner, same Benny, no question. The loan from Harborstone had been taken out during the company's expansion attempt. Equipment, payroll, and a lease on a yard. Then there were lawsuits from suppliers, tax liens, a defaulted equipment note. By the time collections contacted me, the business was effectively dead. Benny had vanished from the company address and stopped answering most public numbers. Marisol kept digging. She found that Harborstone's loan package had included a copy of my old discharge document, not the full official version, but enough to list service dates, rank, and identifying details. It had also included a scanned signature that appeared to match an old transition document I had once signed. The most likely source was not a hacked database. It was our shared transition folder from years earlier, when Benny and I had exchanged sample packets while leaving the Army. I remembered it then with painful clarity. We had sat at that coffee shop, laughing about how neither of us understood civilian resumes, and I had put copies of my forms on a thumb drive so she could use the formatting. She had done the same for me. I probably told myself I would delete her files later. Maybe she told herself the same. Instead, years passed, laptops changed, files migrated, and my trust sat in some folder until her business needed a guarantor. The waiting period while Harborstone reviewed the dispute was brutal. They acknowledged receipt, but acknowledgement is not relief. The collections agency called twice more. The first time, I gave them Priscilla's contact information and told them all communication should go through counsel. The second time, I lost my patience. Mr. Haskins said the account remained active until the lender instructed otherwise. I said, "You have been given a forensic report stating my signature was forged." He replied, "We have noted your dispute." That phrase, "noted your dispute," felt like being shoved into a filing cabinet. I checked my credit again and found a hard inquiry from the loan period that I had never noticed because I had not been shopping for credit at the time. There was also a derogatory notation pending from the collections account. not fully posted yet but visible enough that Priscilla moved faster. She sent a stronger letter citing identity theft procedures, credit reporting obligations, and the lender's duty to investigate once presented with credible evidence. I filed a police report in my county, then an identity theft report with the FTC. Each form asked for facts, dates, names. Writing Benny's name in those boxes felt surreal. I kept thinking of her in uniform. Benny sharing instant coffee during a miserable field exercise. Benny standing up for me when a senior NCO tried to dump someone else's mistake on my section. Benny sending me a message after my father died that said, "I know you do not ask for help, but I am here." Memory can be cruel that way. It does not erase the good just because someone does something terrible. It makes the betrayal heavier. Marisol eventually found a current phone number for Benny through a utility connection tied to her sister's address. Priscilla advised me not to confront her alone, but she also understood that I needed to hear Benny's voice. We agreed on a controlled call from Priscilla's office, with Priscilla present and Marisol listening. I called from my cell because Benny might ignore an unknown number. She answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was cautious. "Liv?" For 1 second I was back in another life. And then I looked at the loan documents on the conference table and said, "Benny, why is my name on your Harborstone loan?" Silence. Not confusion, not outrage. Silence. Then she said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Do not do that. I have the guarantee application. I have the signature. I have the discharge paperwork you used." Another silence, longer this time. I could hear movement, maybe a chair scraping. She said, "I can explain." Those 3 words almost made me laugh because they were exactly what guilty people say when they have run out of denial but still want control of the story. Priscilla slid a note toward me that said, "Let her talk." I said, "Then explain." Benny started with the business. She said the company had been doing well before fuel costs climbed, and 2 contracts fell through. She had equipment payments, payroll, and a landlord threatening to lock her out of the yard. Harborstone would not approve the loan without a strong guarantor. Her credit was damaged from the divorce and the early business debt. She said she thought of me because I had always been responsible, because I had stable income, because I had good credit, because I understood what it meant to serve and sacrifice. Every sentence made it worse. I asked, "Did you sign my name?" She cried then, but not in a way that softened me. It sounded frightened, not sorry. She said, "I traced it from an old form. I was going to tell you once the business stabilized. I swear I was going to make every payment. You were never supposed to know." I said, "You mean I was never supposed to be harmed?" She said, "I knew you would be angry, but I thought if I could just get through the season, I could refinance. I thought you would understand eventually." That word, understand, did something to me. I had spent years being the woman who understood. Understanding why someone missed a call, understanding why a friend was short on money, understanding why veterans sometimes carried shame badly and asked for help poorly. But this was not asking for help. This was using my name as a shield and hoping the debt would stay hidden long enough to become someone else's problem. I said, "You used my service record." She whispered, "I had the old packet." I said, "You used my signature." She said, "I panicked." I said, "You used me." That finally stopped her. Priscilla leaned forward and said clearly, "Bennette, this is Priscilla Nakamura, Olivia's attorney. Do not delete documents. Do not contact the lender pretending to represent Olivia. Preserve all communications related to this loan." Benny started crying harder and said she did not have anything left, that the business had failed, that she was living with her sister, that prosecuting her would ruin her life. I remember staring at the table and thinking, she is still talking as if her life is the only one in danger. I told her, "You risked my home, my credit, my job clearance, and my peace, because you were embarrassed to ask me for money I would have said no to." She said, "I know," but she did not say it like she knew. She said it like she wanted the call to end. After we hung up, I sat in Priscilla's office shaking. Not sobbing, not yelling, just shaking with the delayed force of hearing the truth. Marisol said quietly, "Admissions matter." Priscilla had already taken notes during the call. We were in a one-party consent state for recording, but because the call crossed state lines, and because Priscilla did not want any evidentiary fight we did not need, she focused on contemporaneous notes and follow-up confirmation. She sent Benny a preservation letter and a demand for a written admission. Benny did not provide one, but her attorney eventually acknowledged that she would not contest the forensic findings in the lender dispute. That was enough for Harborstone to move. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Harborstone sent Priscilla a letter stating that, based on the handwriting examination, my identity theft report, and the circumstances of the application, They were removing me as guarantor and ceasing all collection activity against me. They also agreed to instruct the collections agency to close its file as to me, and to request deletion of any credit reporting associated with the account. I read that letter 3 times before I let myself breathe normally. Then I cried in my car outside Priscilla's office, not because everything was fixed, but because the largest immediate threat had finally moved off my chest. The credit correction took another month. Nothing about credit bureaus is instant, even when everyone agrees a mistake has been made. Priscilla sent packets to all 3 bureaus with Harborstone's letter, the FTC report, and the police report. One bureau removed the inquiry and notation within 2 weeks. Another asked for the same documents again, as if paper becomes more convincing when mailed twice. The third corrected the collections reference but left the hard inquiry until Priscilla escalated. I became almost obsessive, checking updates, saving screenshots, keeping a log of every call. Maybe that sounds excessive, but when someone has used your name once, you stop trusting systems to protect it automatically. Eventually, my reports were clean. My credit score recovered. Harborstone confirmed in writing that I had no liability for the loan. The collections agency sent a closure notice. Those documents are still in a folder in my fire safe, labeled with the kind of bluntness I never expected to need. Benny fraud case. Accountability was messier. People like to imagine that once fraud is proven, justice arrives in a neat sequence. It does not. Harborstone had its own remedies against Benny and her failed business. The police report moved slowly because the loan originated in another state, the lender was in another jurisdiction, and Benny's finances were a wreck. Priscilla helped me pursue civil claims for identity theft, fraud, and damages connected to attorney fees and the credit cleanup. Benny did not have much to collect. Her business assets were already encumbered. Her truck had been repossessed. Her bank accounts were thin. Her attorney tried to frame it as a desperate mistake by a struggling veteran entrepreneur who intended to repay the loan. Priscilla's response was simple. Desperation explains motive. It does not create consent. That sentence stayed with me. Eventually, we reached a settlement that included a judgment for my costs, a payment plan, a written admission that I had never authorized the guarantee, and a requirement that Benny provide a sworn statement identifying the documents she used. The payment plan was not large, and I did not expect to recover every dollar of time, stress, and legal expense. But the admission mattered. The sworn statement mattered. In it, Benny confirmed that she had kept an old digital folder from our transition out of the Army. It contained sample resumes, award citations, scanned personal documents, and a signed form I had shared so she could see formatting. She used that signature as a model. She used my old address from the same files. She filled in financial details from memory, public information, and conversations we had over the years. She submitted the application electronically, then mailed a wet signature page that she had traced and practiced until it looked close enough. Reading that statement was like watching someone burglarize a house room by room. Not with a crowbar, but with memories. A conversation here, a document there, a joke about my credit score, a story about my mortgage, a service record shared because I trusted her. Marisol met me one last time after the investigation closed. We sat in a quiet cafe, and she returned a thumb drive of organized evidence. She told me something I wish every veteran heard during transition. Old service records shared between former comrades are an underappreciated fraud risk, not because most people are malicious, but because the information is intimate, official, and often exchanged during a time when trust feels absolute. Full names, dates, service numbers or partial identifiers, signatures, addresses, family contacts, awards, medical hints, finance forms, clearance references, employment history. In the wrong hands, even years later, those details can be stitched into a convincing identity. She said, "People protect passwords because they know passwords are keys. They do not always protect old paperwork because it feels like history." I went home and tore my office apart. I inventoried every old file. I shredded duplicates. I contacted 2 former friends and asked them to delete old shared packets if they still had them. One responded immediately and apologized for never thinking about it. The other never replied, which told me enough. I replaced a few accounts that used old security questions. I placed fraud alerts. I changed how I store documents. I stopped sending scans casually, even to people I love, unless there was a clear reason and a secure method. It felt paranoid for about a week. Then it felt normal. The emotional part took longer. For months, I would think of Benny at strange times. In the grocery store when I passed the gardening section. On Veterans Day when her name appeared in an old group chat. When someone said, "You can always trust the people you served with," and everyone nodded. I did not want to become cynical. The Army gave me friendships that saved me in real ways. It taught me how to rely on people and how to be relied on. But this experience forced me to separate loyalty from access. You can care about someone and still not give them the tools to damage you. You can honor what a friendship was and still name what it became. Benny wrote me a letter about 6 months after the settlement. It came through her attorney, which made it feel less personal, but I read it anyway. She apologized in long, looping sentences. She said she had been ashamed, drowning, convinced that one good season would fix everything. She said she had told herself I would never be affected. She said she knew that was a lie now. She wrote that she missed who we were before money and fear got involved. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I put it in the same folder as the other documents. I did not respond. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, is not the same as reopening a door. The last concrete piece of the case was the lender's internal review. Harborstone changed some of its guarantee verification procedures after Priscilla pushed them about how easily the forged paperwork had passed. They would not admit fault in the way a person admits fault, but they acknowledged that remote guarantees required stronger identity confirmation, especially when a guarantor was not an owner of the borrowing business. That mattered to me more than I expected. I did not want another woman, another veteran, another trusting friend to receive the call I received while standing in her kitchen, being told she owed money for a stranger's company. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had ignored the first call because I assumed it was a scam. What if I had not asked for the loan number? What if I had not demanded the documents? What if I had been too embarrassed to call a lawyer because I did not want to admit someone close to me might have fooled me? Fraud depends on silence as much as it depends on signatures. It depends on people feeling confused, ashamed, or too overwhelmed to push back. The moment I started writing things down, the fraud had an enemy. The moment I made Harborstone show me the signature, the story shifted from their records to the truth. The moment Dr. Mercer put science behind what my eyes suspected, I stopped sounding like a woman making excuses and started sounding like what I was, a victim of a forged guarantee. I rebuilt my piece in small, practical steps. Clean credit reports. Frozen credit. Legal letters filed. Documents destroyed. New boundaries. I also reframed the way I talk about trust. Trust is not proven by handing someone your sensitive information forever. Trust is proven when they accept your boundaries without making you feel guilty. The people who truly respect you do not need unlimited access to your identity to feel close to you. Benny had once been one of the most important people in my life. She also forged my name and risked my financial future. Both facts are true. Holding both is painful, but pretending one cancels the other would be dishonest. If there is anything I want people to take from my story, especially women who have served, built careers, bought homes, protected their independence, and still try to be generous with old friends, it is this. Your past can contain people you loved who should not have access to your present. Old paperwork is not harmless just because it is old. A signature on a dusty form can become a weapon if someone desperate enough decides your name is easier to use than their own. When that collections agent called, I thought I was dealing with a mistake. By the end, I had learned that the person who knew exactly how to make a lie look believable was someone who knew me when I was younger, more open, and less guarded. I got my name removed. I got my credit repaired. I got a written admission. I got some accountability, even if it was imperfect. What I did not get back was the easy belief that shared history automatically means shared honor. Maybe that is the real cost of betrayal, not just the money or the paperwork, but the way it forces you to inspect every memory for fingerprints. If you had been in my place, would you have confronted Benny yourself, or would you have let the attorney handle everything from the start? Would you have pursued the case even knowing she had almost nothing left to pay? Share your thoughts, especially if you have ever had to protect yourself from someone you once trusted completely. Thank you for listening to my story. Subscribe for more true-feeling stories about trust, betrayal, and women fighting to take back their lives, and I hope you leave this one remembering that your name is worth protecting, even from people who once stood beside you.